With the Austin FX4 Black Cab having dominated the London taxi scene since the 1960s, by the 1980s it was apparent more than ever that in the face of changing accessibility and safety standards, a new design would be needed to take over this esteemed mantle, which came in the form of the MCW Metrocab during 1987, a boxy machine compiled from the parts bins of various different companies, but one that demonstrated a practical taxicab for the unique working conditions of the British capital. However, the FX4 and its successor, the LTI Fairway, had true staying power, and against its ease of use, iconic and classic styling, and a rolling program of upgrades, the MCW Metrocab failed to find a niche, which, in combination with various behind-the-scenes corporate collapses and changes in ownership, meant what was by all accounts a superior machine for meeting the needs of a modern taxi scene, became merely an obscurity in the wider UK public transport realm. Metro Cammell Weymann, usually known simply as MCW, was never a car manufacturer in the conventional sense, nor did it aspire to be one in the way companies such as Austin or Ford did, with its roots lying firmly in heavy coach building, buses and railway rolling stock, and by the middle of the 20th century, MCW had established itself as one of Britain's most experienced firms in producing vehicles for intensive urban service. Through Weymann's Limited and later Metro Cammell Weymann, the company had already gained direct experience of the taxi trade by building the Beardmore Mark VII taxi until 1966, with this involvement having exposed MCW to the particular challenges of hackney carriage operation, including relentless stop-start driving, high annual mileages, constant passenger loading and unloading, and the uniquely strict regulatory oversight imposed by the Public Carriage Office. By the mid-1960s, the Beardmore had disappeared from production, and the London taxi market rapidly consolidated almost entirely around a single vehicle, the Austin FX4, which had been introduced in 1958 and was widely regarded as robust, dependable and well-suited to London's requirements, quickly earning the loyalty of drivers and operators alike, though by the late 1960s it was already showing its age. Mechanically, it remained conservative, relying on proven but increasingly outdated engineering, while stylistically, it was rooted firmly in the immediate post-war period, and when Austin withdrew from taxi production in the early 1970s and car bodies took over manufacturing, the FX4's position became even more entrenched, effectively becoming a monopoly product, with no serious competitor capable of meeting London's regulations. Other attempts to challenge it, such as the Winchester taxi, appeared briefly but failed to achieve lasting success or widespread acceptance, while for taxi drivers, this lack of competition brought frustration as well as familiarity, as with no credible alternative on offer, there was little incentive for innovation, with development being slow and improvements in comfort, accessibility and ease of maintenance being limited. MCW was well aware of this situation, and the idea of a purpose-designed modern taxi that could replace, or at least seriously challenge, the FX4 had an obvious logic, with such a vehicle capitalizing on MCW's strengths in chassis engineering, structural durability and modular construction, while also adopting a pragmatic approach to cost and maintenance by using mass-produced components sourced from mainstream car manufacturers. Work on what would eventually become the Metrocab began shortly after the end of the Beardmore in the late 1960s, with the first prototype entering trial in Westminster during 1970, with this vehicle bearing tall, upright proportions that were dictated not by styling fashion but by regulation and practicality, allowing ample headroom for passengers wearing hats and facilitating easy entry and exit. The decision to base the design around readily available production car parts was also evident from the outset and was entirely in keeping with MCW's practical philosophy, with the 1970 prototype using a Ford Cortina grille, though despite having a working prototype and a clear rationale for its existence, MCW did not immediately proceed to production, with the reasons for this long delay having been not fully documented, but several plausible factors were identified. The London taxi market, although prestigious and highly visible, was relatively small in volume and tightly regulated, making it a risky venture for a company whose core business lay elsewhere, and any new taxi would require approval from the authorities and acceptance by drivers who were, by nature, cautious about unproven designs, while at the same time, the FX4, though undeniably aging, remained acceptable to regulators and largely popular with drivers, reducing the commercial pressure for an immediate replacement. This, in combination with broader economic turbulence during the 1970s, including industrial unrest, inflation, and widespread uncertainty within the British manufacturing sector, would also have discouraged investment in a low-volume specialist vehicle, though regardless, the underlying need for a modern taxi did not disappear, and as the years passed it became increasingly difficult to ignore. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the FX4's limitations were becoming more apparent, both technically and socially, with changes in emissions regulations placing pressure on older engine designs, while the withdrawal of the original Austin diesel engine forced car bodies to seek alternatives, with the introduction of the FX4R, powered by a Land Rover engine, proving controversial, as many drivers felt it was poorly suited to the demands of urban stop-start driving. At the same time, social expectations were shifting, and there was a growing awareness of accessibility for disabled passengers, an area in which existing taxis were weak, alongside a broader desire for vehicles that were easier to enter, more spacious inside, and more adaptable to different roles within public service, and it was under these pressures that MCW opted to revisit their earlier concept with renewed vigor. One of the most consequential design decisions was the adoption of a notably low floor, with wheelchair access in particular, demanding design thinking that went beyond a simple ramp, with the entrance having to be wide enough, the internal floor surface sufficiently flat and durable, and the turning space inside the passenger compartment carefully considered, with anchoring points, restraint systems, and the ability to secure a chair safely having to be accommodated without making the interior awkward for ordinary passengers when no wheelchair was carried. MCW also pursued durability and corrosion resistance in ways that reflected its public transport background and its instinct for whole-life cost rather than short-term showroom appeal, as rather than relying on a conventional pressed steel car body, the production Metrocab combined a galvanized steel chassis structure with glass fiber bodywork, with this combination offering several practical advantages for a small-volume manufacturer, while the glass fiber panels also allowed for easy replacement in the inevitable event of damage during regular work in the city. The Metrocab's production specification settled on a Ford 2.5-litre direct-injection diesel from the Transit range, with this engine having been designed for commercial duty cycles and had a vast service network behind it, as well as being familiar to workshops across the country, while MCW paired that utilitarian heart with transmission options that suited the trade, including automatic gearboxes that were widely favoured for stop-start urban work because they reduced fatigue and made crawling traffic less of a chore, though manuals remained available for those who preferred the sense of control, the simplicity, or the lower maintenance cost. By the time it entered production, the Metrocab used headlamps and a grille derived from the Ford Granada Mark II and rear light units associated with the Ford Escort Cabriolet, while interior mouldings and switchgear drew on the Austin Maestro and Montego parts bins, with this construction method being not dissimilar to that of the rival FX4, in that parts bin raiding allowed for a ready supply of components without the need for designing bespoke units. The MCW Metrocab went on sale during April 1987 for £13,950 for the 2-litre injection GLS, with these cars assembled at MCW's Common Lane factory in Washwood Heath, alongside its railway vehicle construction, including the Class 156 Sprinter units, and their more expansive bus building range, primarily the MCW Metrobus, with these cars being put together by a relatively small production workforce of around 50 to 60 line workers. However, the Metrocab's history was inexorably tied to the success of the rival FX4, which in February 1989 was relaunched as the Fairway by London Taxis International, a major revision of the FX4 line with a Nissan engine, a new automatic gearbox, and wheelchair access, with these improvements to the FX4 range demonstrating that the Metrocab presented a credible alternative for cab operators seeking greater accessibility than the existing crop of taxicabs. However, while its launch had demonstrated that the FX4 needed to adapt in order to keep up with the Metrocab, MCW would not be able to exploit this circumstance, as in 1989, MCW's parent group reorganized its assets and the Metrocab business was sold to Reliant, with the rights and production later moving from Washwood Heath to the Reliant factory at Tamworth, where it was built alongside the Reliant Robin three-wheeler range. Unfortunately, in 1990, the Reliant company collapsed following a downturn in sales as four-wheeled economy cars pushed their three-wheeled offerings out of the market, and amid this fallout, the rights to the Metrocab were sold to the coach builder Hooper in 1991, with Hoopers working to maintain the Metrocab's relevance by delivering a series of updated models, with 1994 seeing the release of a 6-seater Metrocab, followed by the Series 2 in 1995 and the Series 3 in 1997. While by that same year, a total of 4,285 Metrocabs had been produced. However, while the Metrocab was merely a curiosity in London, outside of the capital, the car flourished with provincial authorities and fleet users, while Metrocabs were also used as patient transport vehicles by several ambulance services, including London, Mid Glamorgan, North Yorkshire and Royal Berkshire. While in 1999, the Duke of Edinburgh was presented with his own MCW Metrocab, which was powered by an eco-friendly LPG engine, and was used not only for royal engagements around the capital, but also to freely move around the city unnoticed. In June 2001, as the Hooper Company itself began to falter, the Fraser-Nash Group acquired the Metrocab business out of administration and formed Metrocab UK plc, restarting production of the Toyota-engined Metrocab TTT, though this move did little to address the fact that the Metrocab was merely a carryover of a 1980s design that had failed to corner the market during its early years and had little chance of long-term survival into the mid-2000s. By the time of its relaunch, the LTI Fairway had been axed, and the new TX1 had succeeded it as the primary London taxi, with the TX2 soon to be released in 2002, while outside of London, a slew of regular production cars that could be used for cab service were displacing dedicated taxi designs in increasing quantities, ranging from nimble saloons like the Ford Mondeo and the Vauxhall Vectra, to people carriers such as the Ford Galaxy, and even minivans such as the Volkswagen Caravelle and the Mercedes V-Class. Thus, the Metrocab TTT would stumble through production after its 2001 restart, followed by the suspension of assembly in 2004, and then a brief revival between April 2005 and August 2006, at a rate of one vehicle per week, before finally ceasing production entirely, though despite the end of the Metrocab, the name would be revived in late 2013 as the Ecotive Metrocab, a range-extended electric hackney carriage designed to meet tightening London requirements and to operate with zero emissions capability. Entering sales in 2014 at a cost of £33,000, by early 2015, a small fleet was running with the operator Concab, with reports describing the first fare-paying trial work taking place in the city, with May 2015 seeing a £50 million investment for a production capacity of 3,500 Metrocabs per year at an expanded Multimatic plant in Tile Hill, Coventry. Though such a move led to a prolonged trademark dispute with the London Taxi Company, which was ultimately rejected by the High Court in 2016 and upheld on appeal in 2017, though Ecotive Limited would later file for voluntary liquidation in November 2021, bringing another end to the Metrocab name. In the end, the MCW Metrocab presented an interesting experiment in developing a taxicab that would meet the changing sentiments towards accessibility during the 1980s, illustrating a design tailored more for the modern market than the aging FX4, and appeared to be such a potent competitor that LTI was forced to amend the FX4 into the Fairway in order to ensure continuing relevance in an ever-tightening cab scene. However, though the Metrocab may have brought the concept of an accessible London cab to the fore, corporate turbulence and a continuous change of hands between owners and production facilities killed any chance of it becoming truly competitive, and by the turn of the new millennium, it was evident that this machine, despite its continuing production, would never be the market beater hoped for originally back in the 1980s.